congratulations and well done, John, on a stellar career in tourism. Over 40 years, my goodness, it's fabulous service. And that, of course, will bring us back to the late 60s or thereabouts.
1969, yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't a great time then either, was it?
It was a difficult time then, and I always remember when I joined Ryan's in 1969, Sean Lemass was the vice chairman of Ryan's.
Yeah, my house.
And he had, as a very shy young fellow going in to the first AGM, and we were talking about capital allowances above everything, which he had introduced a couple of years earlier. And they backdated the capital allowances to any hotels that were built since 1960.
My goodness.
And the reason for it was very simple. At that time there were about 17,000 hotel rooms in the country. There were only 3,700 to be exact, with bathroom and suite. So there were very little hotels with bathrooms and suite in the country.
Yeah.
When you compare that to 61,000 today, and
goodness me.
all en suite, and every B&B in the country have an en suite accommodation, so the whole situation has changed.
Different times, the 70s and 80s, they were hard times too, apart from the civil unrest in Northern Ireland, interest rates and that sort of thing.
They were hard times, the interest rates were high. I suppose the difference between then and now was we were very competitive, our cost base was low.
That's right.
The expectations of our people was low, and the level of debt was only a fraction of what it is now. We weren't highly indebted, and in fact in the hotel sector back in the 70s and 80s you pretty well couldn't get a loan for a hotel. You were lucky if you could get 5 years of a loan from any bank, and then it was rolled over and reviewed. So there were very difficult times in which to exist, but the cost base was so low. But we had grants which were there, which helped the development of hotels and the support of.
And the northern troubles were always in the background.
The northern troubles were always in the background. They kicked off in 1969, 68, and God, I remember my first few days, the August 69, the trouble. I joined the hotel sector, Ryan's at the time, or Ryan's Tourist Holdings, then known, and down at home in Limerick over the August weekend, listening to the troubles and we shall not stand idly by speeches by Jack Lynch and a frightening period. And
people forget that. Of course, a lot of people don't remember that. But then we got to the 90s, and that period from the sort of mid 90s through the early noughties, extraordinary expansion of the tourism product. Major investment. It looked like a different world.
Looked like a different world. I suppose that happened, and any of us who were through it, the big difficulty you had, as I mentioned earlier, was the shortage. You couldn't get funding for any capital investment. Yes. Other countries had the split between ownership and the management of hotels, and there was no investments. There were no institutions here prepared to invest money in the same way as you got insurance companies and pension funds make long-term investments in most other European cities. What happened in the mid-90s was virtually most of the capital allowance schemes for equipment leasing and for other aviation leasing, all those were terminated. You were left in with hotels, car parks and nursing homes perhaps. And people identified hotels and a property taken hotels, and it attracted people to come in to invest, avail of the capital allowances and writing off the capital investment over 7 years, and then either lease it on or have management agreements with operators with buyback options. And that was very good. It worked. It incentivized the growth of the hotel sector, and it was a classic example of a scheme that worked very well. Very little bureaucracy attached to it. If you invested money in it, you got your relief. The difficulties arose, of course, when it came to phasing them out in 2002, 2003, and the Minister of Finance at the time did say they were being phased out, but unfortunately, for whatever reasons, they extended the period by which qualifying projects would qualify for the capital allowances.
Great tragedy really in many ways. I suppose there was nothing we could have done about the global recession which came along, but there were other signs, I suppose, in more recent years of over-dependence on the domestic market and maybe of lack of adequate growth from overseas holiday visitors. But I suppose we would have had a serious downturn anyway in tourism, but could we have avoided some of it maybe?
I think that probably coincides with the way the Irish economy grew, and if you go back over the last maybe 12 years, and if from the mid-90s on, when we had the growth there, it was pretty much export-driven growth. We were competitive.
Yeah.
You had the difficulties with some national wage agreements. Our cost base was increased dramatically.
Yeah.
The cost of doing business in Ireland increased. Our competitiveness started to wane, and the construction industry, the GDP growth in the country was pretty much driven by the construction industry.
Yeah.
There was a lot of domestic demand which followed from that level of GDP growth, and naturally the domestic market kept pace with the level of expansion in the hotel sector. And as that was happening, people perhaps took their eye off what was happening, in particularly in the British market.
Yeah.
Another item which affected the British market, and you can tie it back to the year probably 2000, 2001, certainly after the foot and mouth outbreak in March or February, March 2001, was the long-stay British holidaymaker stopped coming to Ireland.
Yeah.
Mind you, we told him.
That's right, of course.
We told him not to come at the beginning of 2001, and they never came back.
Yeah.
Now, we were lulled into a false sense of insecurity then, because of the growth of the city breaks market.
That's right.
And people were saying Britain was performing quite well, but in fact it was in terms of numbers. There were people coming to the city breaks.
And not down the country.
And they were not going to the countries. And it highlighted what we were all quantifying now. And
sure.
there were two different markets.
That's right.
There's a market for city breaks and there's a market for countries, and the two of them are two different target groups.
Sure. And finally, John, I know you a long time, and I think I'd describe you as a pragmatic optimist. Despite all the old difficult times we're going through, how do you feel about the future? I presume you see some hope?
It's going to be very challenging. I think the level of debt is going to be the largest single, the amount of indebtedness of businesses is going to be the largest single challenge we're going to be faced with.
Yeah.
And on the optimistic side, we have a very good product. We have a very good hotel product throughout the country. We have too many hotel rooms, and that will just have to be faced up to. And if that is faced up to, we will have a very competitive and a sustainable product. Yeah. But I think that's the first things first. The first thing first is to address the public capacity issue.
Yeah. Well, John, thanks for talking to us, but more than anything else, thanks for a wonderful service representing the industry. And of course, one of the things that you're too modest to mention is that through your own efforts, indeed, and those of others, you've raised the profile of tourism within Ireland to a terrific level where it is now seen as our most important indigenous industry. So we hope we'll be seeing loads of you around in the future. Very best of luck.
Hopefully. Thanks, Eamon.